A new year, 2026. A new series of messages. And I have a question for you. I wonder, who were your favourite, have a ponder in the silence, who were your favourite teachers at school? Why were they your favourite teachers? So just have a think. See if you can conjure some of those pictures of the teachers, or perhaps remember their names. Perhaps some of the subjects they were teaching. Teachers that engaged their class, perhaps. Perhaps they were teachers that created connections, provoked a response. One of my favourite teachers was a teacher called Mr. Lloyd. He was an old man, silver hair, and he taught history. And part of the reason why I enjoyed sort of him as a teacher was he was very passionate about his subject. He would be explaining all the different connections, particularly when he was teaching local history. So he'd be saying why these particular place names were farms, or place names ending in ton or ham or this, that and the other. And he didn't do it in a dry sort of way. He did it with enthusiasm and a passion that got you involved. Yes, there was the odd occasional blackboard rubber that came flying in different directions when people weren't engaged, but we'll quickly skip over that. But suffice to say, he was one of my favourite teachers at secondary school. As I say, I wonder what was yours. And if we can, Jeremy, if we can go on to the first slide, I think. For Jesus, some of the things said about him and his teaching from Mark's Gospel. The people were amazed at his teaching because he taught them as one who had authority, not as the teachers of the law. And then later on in Mark's Gospel, he taught them many things by parables. In this series, we are exploring Jesus and the way that he taught, not by his parables, but by the way he asked questions, provoking a response in those listening. And if I can get this right. No. It's okay, it's coming. I love technology, it's brilliant. It is on, because it is on, I think. Jeremy, do you want to... That's it. Questions Jesus asked. Looking in Mark's Gospel. There we go. So as you can see, that's what we'll be focusing on for the next few weeks. Questions that Jesus asked in Mark's Gospel. So if you're one of these people that fancy getting ahead of the game, and I know there's one or two of you that like doing that, then why not take some time to read through Mark's Gospel and perhaps try and spot the questions and the settings that we'll be looking at. Because out of all the Gospels, Mark's Gospel is seen as one of those Gospels that you might call is an action Gospel, with plenty of, then Jesus did this, and immediately. There isn't time, it's not a slow Gospel. It's very much a Gospel when there's action, one thing after another, dash, dash, dash. And yet there are times when Jesus asks a question of his listeners to provoke and challenge him. Here's the questions we're going to be exploring together up until Easter. And if we can have the next slide, Jeremy. So, 18th, we have a question of provision. We have a question of law. A question of loyalty. And then as we move through Lent towards Easter, a question of endurance and a question of isolation. Now, those of you extremely observant might be saying, but hang on, Steve, what are we looking at today? Because there's no question title there. Well, today we're beginning the series with, Jeremy, if you'd like to move us on, a question of trust from Mark chapter 4, verses 35 to 41. And so let's just remind ourselves of what happens then. That day, when evening came, he said to his disciples, "Let us go over to the other side." Leaving the crowd behind, they took him along, just as he was in the boat. There were also other boats with them. A furious squall came up, and the waves broke over the boat, so that it was nearly swamped. Jesus was in the stern, sleeping on a cushion. The disciples woke him up and said to him, "Teacher, don't you care if we drown?" He got up, rebuked the wind, and said to the waves, "Quiet, be still." Then the wind died down, and it was completely calm. He said to his disciples, "Why are you so afraid? Do you still have no faith?" They were terrified and asked each other, "Who is this? Even the winds and the waves obey him." So, in this account, fear plays a big part. So I thought I would break the ice for the new year, so to speak, by asking whether you know what fears these words describe. And if we could have the next slide up, Jeremy. There we go. Agoraphobia, claustrophobia, hydrophobia, keep it in your heads for a minute, nyctophobia, and more recently, nomophobia. So have we got a roving mic, Neil? And have we got someone willing to do the roving mic? Aha! Thank you, Zone. Right, okay, hands up if you'd like to answer the first one. Okay, agoraphobia. Nice, easy one to start us off with. Oh, we have Wendy down the front here. Oh, go on then.
I believe it's a fear of going out.
Yeah, just about fear of open spaces. Yeah, we'll go with that one. Brilliant. Okay, claustrophobia. Anyone like to give us... Oh, hang on. Ruth here, Zone. Just round the corner. Claustrophobia.
A fear of enclosed spaces.
Correct. Wonderful.
Lifts.
Oh, yeah. Lifts. Yes, indeed. Okay.
A fear of water.
Nyctophobia, if I've got my pronunciation correctly. Okay, we've got plenty of lights on in here, but if we have them all off. Anybody like to give a guess? Thank you. Fear of the dark. Okay, and as I say, there is one more that I've put there that I would say has become prevalent rather recently, extremely recently, in fact. I don't want to be ageist, but some people might say it's particularly prevalent amongst the young. Although, given some of our meal tables over Christmas, I have to confess that just about all of the members of my family were falling to it at one time or another. And it's to do with this thing. Yes? Any idea what nomophobia might be? Fear of not being in contact with your mobile phone. Okay, anyway, thanks, Owen, if you'd like to give the phone back to your dad. So, as I say, these are just a handful of the many types of phobias that exist. If you're curious, then find out via Google the number of phobias there are. But those are just a handful. So this, as I say, occurs towards the beginning of Mark's Gospel. And as I mentioned previously, this is a bit of a busy Gospel. And that's reflected by what has already happened. And so I'll just give you a quick synopsis. Mark chapter 1, driving out of an unclean spirit, causing news to spread quickly through the region. No need for sharing of stories on social media in those days. Along with the healing of Simon's mother-in-law. Indeed, yes. Along with many who had various diseases. Everyone looking for Jesus. A healing of a man with leprosy. And that's just chapter 1. Chapter 2, and there's the healing and forgiving of a paralyzed man brought by his friends and lowered through the roof. And as a result, questions are asked of Jesus about fasting and the Sabbath and who he had come for. And who had he come for? Well, next slide, Jeremy. We might be able to see. Jesus said to them, It's not the healthy who need a doctor, but those who are ill. I've not come to call the righteous, but sinners. Jesus, at the beginning of Mark's gospel, was quite clearly stating who he had come for, and it wasn't those who you might have expected. Just bear that one in mind. So with all that busyness in mind, let's look at this incident on the Sea of Galilee. The lake is 209 metres below sea level, apparently, and is surrounded by towering hills. So, if you think about it, below sea level, towering hills, we have an ideal wind tunnel in effect, which is not good, really, because that means that any storms, any winds that blow up round there are going to literally go straight through. And apparently there have been storms in recent recorded history that caused houses along the shoreline to be swept away, along with several people being drowned. And yet, at the beginning of our account, it appears an idyllic scene. Several boats are out on the lake. You know, you can just see them perhaps waving to one another. Everything's fine. Jesus is asleep. Everything feels quite fine, you know. Everyone's all chilling out. It's nice and relaxed. Until suddenly a storm appears without warning and develops quickly, causing all the disciples in the boat to be extremely afraid. And I wonder, who would have been most afraid? The disciples, like Simon and Andrew, seasoned fishermen? Or perhaps would it have been Matthew, a tax collector by persuasion? Who would have been the ones who would have been most afraid? I'll leave you to ponder on that. But either way, you can imagine, can't you, a collective fear taking hold. And of course, the thing is, collective emotions can sort of be magnified and exaggerated quite quickly. As one of my favourite TV programmes that's just started its New Year run demonstrates extremely well. I'll leave you to ponder what that TV programme is, but I'm sure you can work it out. And so it causes them to wake Jesus up and provokes them to ask the question that seems really harsh. Jesus, don't you care about us? Sounds really harsh, because if you go back in Mark's gospel that we've just looked at, all that busyness, he's shown he cares, because he's been healing people, he's been doing this, he's been doing that, he's been forgiving. He's done so much stuff that shows he cares. Yet, in that moment of fear and panic, the disciples totally forgot that. They're asking a question. Don't you care about us? Jesus, wake up, don't you care? See, the thing is, that is what fear can do to me, to you, to us. It can cause a sort of the idea of rational thought and our knowledge of people from previous situations to go totally flying out the window and cause us to react in totally irrational ways. Fear is an extremely powerful emotion when it grasps hold of an individual, and can be even worse when it grasps hold of a group of people. Whether it be fear of storms or fear of change, fear of all sorts of things. Fear can cause flight, fight, or freeze, the 3 Fs you might say. Are we self-aware enough to know what our response to fear is? Are we self-aware enough to know that, hang on, when we're reacting in an unusual way, hang on, is that because I'm afraid of what's about to happen or what could happen? Can we spot it in others? Oh, hang on, they're reacting like that, which is an unusual reaction because they're afraid. Are we aware enough to spot that? Jesus wakes and speaks to the storm with authority. Be still. And the waves die down. And just for an extra detail, the lake is described as completely calm. Not just, well, it's got a few ripples on the lake. No, Mark says completely calm, with the disciples rescued. And not only them, but everyone in the other boats as well. Because don't forget, in that description Mark gives, there's other boats on the lake. They too would have seen the miracle. They too would have seen a storm 1 minute, perhaps seen Jesus stand up and heard his voice, and whether they'd have known it was Jesus would be another matter, but they'd have recognised the fact someone stood up, said, "Be still," silence. Then Jesus asked this question, our question of trust for this week. Why are you so afraid? Along with its supplementary, do you still have no faith? And it sounds rather harsh of Jesus, doesn't it, to ask it in that way? But just as an aside, I'm reliably informed by those that have done a lot more study than I have, that Mark is viewed as the first gospel account written out of all the gospels. And with that, in that account, it's so often his account that's not so complimentary about the disciples, that's a bit more raw. And it certainly is so here, isn't he? Why are you so afraid? There's a real confrontation going on in terms of the disciples and Jesus. And yet, remember my careful context setting at the beginning. The disciples had seen all that Jesus had done. They had seen the healings, the forgivings, the parables. And yet, they had apparently failed. They had apparently failed in what CV experts would call transferable skills. They weren't able to say, yes, well, Jesus has done this, this, and this, and here we are in this storm, therefore he can do this. It wasn't happening. Why? Because of that fear. Unlike David in the Old Testament facing Goliath. And if we can have the next slide, please, Jeremy. Remember David being faced with Goliath? Saul gives him his armour and says, well, you're going to need my armour to take on Goliath, aren't you? He tries it on, and lo and behold, well, it's fairly obvious it's not going to fit. So he says, okay, I'm not going to be able to handle your armour. I'm just going to go with my sling against Goliath. And David says to Saul, the Lord who rescued me from the paws of the lion and the paw of the bear will rescue me from the hands of the Philistine. There's almost another word that feels like it should be added there, a therefore. And that's what we're called, the kind of faith you and I are called to have, a therefore faith. God has protected me or provided for me or done this for me in this situation, and this one. Therefore, he will be with me in that. Because they had seen miracles of confrontation with impure spirits, healing of leprosy, healing of paralysis, announcing of forgiveness. But this was something new. This was about control, authority over nature. And even though there had been Jesus' baptism with the associated voice from heaven, obviously that had not quite been translated into what that might fully mean. Remember the voice from heaven? This is my son with whom I am well pleased. They'd seen that. They'd heard the voice. But they hadn't been able to translate it into what that might mean. So they'd seen the glory, to sort of go back to our Christmas series, but perhaps maybe 400 years of silence had dulled their senses, hadn't quite prepared them to work out, to be able to see who Jesus was. And before we're too harsh on the disciples, how might we have answered the question if we were in the same position? After all, there was another question that the disciples were asking amongst themselves. Who is this that even the winds and the waves obey him? They were struggling with 2 plus 2 to make that even equal 3, yet alone 2 plus 2 to equal 4. We, of course, are living in the benefit of knowing the answer, aren't we? Or are we? And the reason I ask that is because has the knowledge made that short journey from the head down to the heart? We might know it up here. We might sing it. But the question is, in this coming year of 2026, with all that we face individually and perhaps at work or in our community or corporately together as a church, has it made that journey to the heart? Let alone what circumstances we might be facing in our own lives. So what are those fear-inducing positions that we find ourselves in today, in the next week, month, year? After all, maybe it's just me, but how many others, especially at the beginning of a new year, are looking ahead, making resolutions, making plans, and then realising, hang on, there still seem to be some very real obstacles that can appear overwhelming and frightening, at least humanly speaking. Because when we say that'll never happen or this won't happen, we're not allowing space for God, are we? So what might be some of the fears that are being raised? Have a think about it as I carry on. In what areas of our lives? What might God be asking of us at work, in our community, in our church? What steps of faith might he be asking us to take to do something new? Perhaps on the second Sunday that I've already mentioned, he might be giving us a nudge to say, why don't you try something different? Don't do the usual. Try that. Try this. Or when it comes to making decisions as a church, try something different. It could be the fear of change in our personal circumstances. I say, or being called by God to do something different, new for him, in our engagement with him in worship, or for him in the world, in sharing our faith in word or action. Remember this? Might help us. Or individually or corporately. Maybe to take a step of reconciliation towards that person that winds us up, who we're struggling with. Because after all, yes, we're a new creation. The old has gone, the new has come. But what else does it say in that verse of 2 Corinthians chapter 5 that we love to quote? We're then called to a ministry of reconciliation. We don't often quote that bit of it. We love the old has gone, the new has come. Yeah, brilliant. We don't often quote the next bit. Yet, pardon me a minute. I've got too carried away. Contrast those fears to the words of Jesus. Jeremy, if you can move on, please. Words that he talks about in the purpose in his coming. I have come that they may have life and life to the full. Does that suggest a life governed by fear or a life governed by Christ's freedom? Elsewhere, Jesus replies, peace I leave with you, my peace I give you. Do not let your hearts be troubled and do not be afraid. And I can almost hear some of you in your mind saying, oh, that's all very, very well for you to say that, Jesus, but you don't know that I'm facing, or how are you going to help me with this? Well, what about the words of John, writing to a church facing persecution? Next slide, Jeremy. Familiar words, but perhaps at the start of a new year, we need to hear them afresh. God is love, and whoever lives in love lives in God, and God in him. This is how love is made complete among us, so that we will have confidence on the day of judgment. In this world, we are like Jesus. There is no fear in love. Perfect love drives out fear. I'll just say that last bit again. Perfect love drives out fear. So as Elizabeth comes up to lead us in our closing worship, why not take time to consider whether at the beginning of a new year, an outpouring of that perfect love is something you need to experience afresh in order to equip you, either to face known situations that you know are inducing fear in you, or alternatively, just to simply face the unknown. And with that in mind, if you sort of come forward to this bit, that bit over there near the stairs, or that bit towards the back near the door, those two places, and somebody will come alongside you and offer to pray for you. Alternatively, if you've come this morning and thinking, Steve, that's just too much, I'm asking somebody who I don't really know much to pray for me, then ask somebody who you do trust to simply just spend some time praying with you. As I say, how this year are we going to face that fear of the unknown? Yes, to 2026, new year, new slate, wonderful. But it might just be causing a few fears because of the uncertainties. How's this going to happen? Why is that going to happen? What ifs? The invitation's there.